Forms the basis of our discussion this afternoon on Bottom Line Africa, awakening the Mandela spirit, and of course that speech there by Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. And I'm now joined by Mr. Denis Kothe. He is the President, the African Union Economic, Social and Cultural Council. He's with me in studio. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me. And we're also joined by Dr. Charles Sinkala. He is the President, Africa 55 States, an organization of African political parties, also an international relations consultant, and he is joining us live all the way from South Africa. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for joining us on Bottom Line Africa. Okay, straight on to that day, 18th of July, a day where we mark the Mandela Day, and of course, all in the spirit of giving back. Perhaps I could start with the two of you, gentlemen, who are with me in studio this afternoon, and let's talk about how you each individually marked that day. If I could start with you, Mr. Denis.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, viewers. Mandela Day is a very special day for us as Africa. And we all remember Mandela as our hero. Mandela was a hero in the sense that he changed the way people are looking at Africa. And this is a day that is very important for us, and we keep on remembering. And Mandela, when he came out, people expected that he will radically make a lot of changes in South Africa as president. But because of his love for peace, his love for unity, he ensured that South Africa remained united, and Africa remained united the same way. I think this is a very important spirit that we need also to emulate as leaders of Africa. Thank you.
How about you, sir, Dr. Charles, especially also being in South Africa? How did you perhaps commemorate this day, the Mandela Day?
Thank you very much, Kosela, and thank you to your viewers who are viewing us today. I think it's a period that we reflect how pivotal role Nelson Mandela played in terms of reuniting a broken society, especially after the abolishment of apartheid. And I think the transition of government from apartheid to the new democratic dispensation has created a harmony where it created a rainbow nation. And I think that has to be commended. That's the leadership we need in Africa.
Thank you, sir. If we could take a look at that speech, the keynote lecture by Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary, which has been termed as a bold one. He talked about inequality, and particularly saying that COVID-19 is shining a spotlight on this injustice. Mr. Denis, if I could engage you on this matter of inequality, and especially now with the pandemic and the fact that it's exposed everything that has been buried over the years, if I would put it like that, sir.
The UN Secretary General was very right in his statement. And if you look at even our society today as Africa, there's a lot of inequality. Without necessarily looking at only COVID-19, the inequality is still something that we need to deal with in Africa. And COVID-19 has really exposed this. Look at how the pandemic is going on in various countries in Africa. And look at the disparity between those who are rich and those who are poor. When we are told to observe the regulations of washing your hands and making sure that you are safe, people want to do that, but they are not in a position to do that. And that in itself is discrimination, because we cannot have a situation where we are expected to behave the same, but others are more privileged and others are less privileged. Now, this is quite a challenge, and it's something that we really need to look at. And I'm happy that the UN Secretary General openly and obviously made this statement, knowing very well that there's a problem that needs to be dealt with. And COVID is an eye-opener in terms of looking at our inequality situation.
And it's, if I could engage you, Dr. Charles, still on that speech by Antonio Guterres, where he talks of racial injustice. I mean, this comes just a few weeks after we saw, you know, the protests that were held globally, if I'd put it like that, under the hashtag Black Lives Matter. This is after the killing of George Floyd. But also, this comes at a time where, especially in South Africa, we still experience xenophobia. If I could get your comments regarding that, and particularly a statement that Guterres made, where he said that the legacy of colonialism still reverberates in the world, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. His speech by the chair of United Nations, Guterres, has nothing to be surprised of. I mean, that was actually anticipated. And this has been the speech which has been there from the United Nations over and over and over and again. We must remember very well that the erstwhile Kofi Annan spoke very decisively in terms of inequalities and the balance of economic opportunities in the world. And as well, his predecessor, Ban Ki-moon, also as well continued to speak decisively. And, you know, these are things which we have been talking about for the past 75 years when the United Nations was established. But it is very shockingly and surprisingly that we still have these inequalities and in our communities, and our countries are at the biggest problem and challenge in terms of trying to regulate these inequalities. You know, his speech, he was more of he was talking about the same problems, but we expect more of practical approach on how the things will be changed, on how the implementation is going to be dealt with. I mean, the speech was very amazing and well received, but the question is, are we going to remain still on the speech, or are we going to go beyond the speech, which has been given a fundamental role of implementation by individual member states and countries? And what role is United Nations has been mandated to go beyond just the establishing speech or talking about what the problems are in the communities? You know, it is also very shockingly that especially Africa, for over 60 years, we've been talking about the problems which we have, but there's very lack of implementation in terms of spearheading the programs. You know, we believe that the United Nations has a union for the whole world and countries in particular, supposed to take a lead in identifying countries like, for instance, Zimbabwe. What are the problems of Zimbabwe has got? The education is paralyzed, the economy is paralyzed. Can we have the guns and the things and tanks to incubate Zimbabwe for a period of time and make sure that Zimbabwe sustained itself, get out of the sanctions which are there, and build the Zimbabwe economy in terms of agriculture and gross domestic happiness? You must remember that all the organization has been based on the country's relations. And I think one item which caught my eye, I think in his speech, he mentioned that economy must not be based on countries. Economy must be based on people, because people are the ones who actually have the hit in terms of the economic activities. So when you talk about the economy has increased by 1.5%, you know, we're talking about the country, but the individuals, they are not actually having that type of increase in terms of economy. So the leadership of organizations, the regional organizations, the international organizations, has to sync together in terms of trying to eradicate poverty, end corruption. And while they talk about the ending corruption, they must show the way the member states has to demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that this is how we have to end corruption. You see in China, they've got a very good approach where they've got a zero tolerance in terms of corruption. But when you look at the other nations, you know, like Uganda or even other African nations, including beyond Africa, corruption is condemned. But by those who are condemning corruptions, we find that they are the same people who are participating in terms of corruption activities. So, but my point, what I'm trying to talk about is, can we stop talking and can we see the activities based on results? You know, many speeches has been promulgated on the past 75 years, and you know, very little has been implemented. And if you check on the speeches, all of them end up in the news, in the mainstream media, but there's nothing implemented on the system. So if we're complaining about the situations to improve, if we have to get a globalist economy, I hear he was talking about a new social contract. We can't talk about the new social contract because the new social contract was established 70, 100 years ago. You know, that social contract that we govern ourselves, we become self-reliant, we get away from colonialism, you know, dependency of other international funders. You know, we have a sustainable economies in our countries that we produce what we eat and we do not eat what we do not produce. So we can't be now, after almost 100 years, that we must draw up another new social contract, you know. Just like I've mentioned earlier before in different platforms, that the river and the dams decided long time ago that they'll be flowing towards the sea, and there's no way they're going to divert, and everything they do, they are in that stream and conduit of going down the sea. And I think the world as well must decide, because now what we are facing, like what you mentioned earlier about the unrest, injustices, and the racial systematic injustices in the United States of America and the rest of the world, this is going to now spark a revolution that now people are fed up of the system that has been enacted to protect them. Now they'll be taking these things in their own hands. The policing as well and the law enforcement of injustices has been a disgrace, because we do not see the law enforcement to go door by door and make sure that the policies of inequalities has been established to protect people from different inequalities in the communities is adhered to. And we don't see that system of policing. As long as the policies end up on the speech and in the mainstream media, and is not enacted into law, that would be a challenge. What he's talking about is very clear and very good, but can we have those policies enacted into law so that we can hold our governments to account?
Dr. Charles, just allow me to engage you further, because you've talked about a lot of things, and you've mentioned the word people more than twice, actually. But then the people, ourselves, you two gentlemen with me in studio, and a lot of the people that are watching us, have we learned? Are we ready to take this action? Because, for instance, if I could just talk about corruption, yes, we blame the leaders and all of that, but we're still the same people who, for instance, offer bribes, If I could also go back to the point that I mentioned earlier, particularly on South Africans, xenophobia, for instance, and that does not only, it's not only about South Africa, because, for instance, also here in Kenya, especially right now during the COVID-19 restrictions, we've witnessed a lot of police brutality and deaths as a result of this brutality. So how far are we as the people in terms of now acting and no longer saying, Dr. Charles?
Yes, you see, all what you are seeing about it, that's why I did not want to touch on the symptoms of what has created this situation, which is a corruption, poverty, inequality, unemployment. These are symptoms of the rotten system which hasn't been established and adhered to, which is not even into law. If you talk about Kenya, where you are there's no law that protects the citizens, that the government should create employment for them. As long as there will be an absence of a law, a constitutional law backed by the constitution, that the government is mandated to do certain things and ABCD, citizens and people, yes, I'll mention again the people, they will have nowhere to run. If you look at the bureaucratic system of governance, the way we've created in terms of regional organization and international community organization, it's a different set that does not even keep an eye or an oversight on countries. So countries are not led or implemented to be led to make sure that they conform. Xenophobia, yes, the opportunities are small because of the migration, and migration is reality. We cannot stop migration, from people moving from country to country. It's not only that the people are moving, are fleeing from conflict or other uncertainties, but they also want just a different environment for themselves to be established. So countries must be educated and a set of ideology of following up, so that they've got a backing from governments that what you are doing, we're actually doing towards an achievement of something. In the absence of a political will and economical will to lead people in a designated way and draw into them, we cannot just say we are ending corruption. Most of the people, they don't even know what corruption is in Africa. I was shocked to interview a few people on one of the platforms where I speak. They don't even know what corruption is. Corruption, they mentioned about only the government, that the government tenders, that is corruption. Corruption is something different from how the perspective of the narrative of the people they've talked about. Corruption's got two people involved. There's a recipient and the initiator of corruption. And many of these government high-profile elite corruption has been initiated from elsewhere, if you talk about Africa. So these people, they come with the suitcases of money and they approach these government officials just to get a tender. So how do we educate them to resist and show them that the impact of their actions in terms of corruption, it comes as a result of migration and uncertainty in the country? And I think if you talk about also...
because I'm told we are out of time and I need to engage Mr. Dennis. My apologies for that. Mr. Dennis,
let me conclude there. Let me conclude there, because you know, the lack of that continuity of integrating all organizations together to work together for common goal. When there's a citizen stranded in Kenya from Congo, the two governments together must sit back together and deal with that issue. And I think that we're going to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Dennis, let's take a look at the leadership within, the African Union member states, and of course also in your capacity as the President, African Union Economic, Social and Cultural Council. And going back, of course, to the Mandela spirit, are we still inspired by this spirit, especially, in today's generation of leadership, sir?
I'll talk about that in relation to, I wanted to interject when my brother was talking about the speech by the UN Secretary General. I think we've had a lot of talks, a lot of presentations, but it is high time that we have action. We need really action that can change things, and we cannot be talking and talking and without endlessly without any result. Now, coming to the point that you've raised, he also talked about corruption, and you are talking about the Mandela spirit. It's like we really respect what the late hero did, and we admire the leadership that he left behind. But the question is, do we want to also leave examples like Mandela did? And also, if you ask yourself, what made the late Mandela become a hero? This is something that I keep discussing with my colleagues. Mandela only did the right things. Why can't our leaders do the right things? And I think it is important for us as Africa to reflect and say, in 1963, when most of these countries got independence, where are we today as we are making the Africa Day the other day, and where do we want to go? What are the achievements? What are the challenges? So there are a lot of things that we need to look at as Africa. We need to rethink ourselves and put strategies that can take the continent further. The UN Secretary General also spoke about corruption. Corruption has been talked about, but corruption is not just winning tenders in governments. Corruption is very huge. It's an institution of itself. And I'm happy to say this, that I was so happy when I was coming here that Senator Sakaja, who was involved in certain issues, apologized and resigned his position because of that. Corruption is also abuse of position. It's abuse of office. And therefore, when you're a leader and you find yourself in a situation and you want to manipulate your position, then that is where corruption starts. Winning tenders in government and manipulating how people make business is just one aspect of corruption. Corruption has ruined institutions. Corruption has ruined countries. Look at our education sector in Kenya, for instance. Look at the health sector. You find that everything is not moving because of corruption. Now, these are some of the issues that are affecting us continentally. And when you talk about what the African leaders are doing at the continental level, I really compliment, because when I listen to the meetings that our leaders participate in, I think they also understand that there's a problem that we need to deal with. The question is, what is lacking? Where is the implementation? Why can we put these things in practice so that we can stop them? Corruption can be stopped very easily. When the leaders take responsibility, like what Senator Sakaja just did today, and say, my minister has been implicated in a corruption-related scandal, and I'm the one responsible, and they resign. When ministers take responsibility themselves, or people in positions, and say, I'm responsible because this has been done within my docket. Who does that in Africa? Now, these are things that we talk about. These are things that many people write good papers about. But the question that is missing, the point that is missing is implementation. Now, I'm happy to say that we are on the right direction. The African leaders are beginning to point out ills that are affecting the continent. Various countries are beginning to ask themselves questions, beginning to analyze what needs to be done to improve the countries. And we must start by dealing with corruption. Corruption is a very strong segment that has given Africa a very bad image. Corruption exists in other countries, but sometimes it's very sad for us, especially in Africa, when you find that somebody eats the money of the less privileged, people who are sick. We have COVID now that is going on around the continent. You hear that money has been eaten, and this is money that is actually destined to help people who are sick. This is very sad for us as a continent. And therefore, I think that corruption issue is an issue that we must look at critically. Good governance issues are issues that we must discuss and we must talk about. I'm happy also to compliment Dr. Sinkala, who is my colleague who are on the panel with, for starting a thinking facility, a thinking forum where we as Africans, we as Kenyans, we as Zimbabweans, we as South Africans, we can begin to engage. We can begin to talk about what is facing us, and working with the civil society and other non-state actors to support the initiatives and the agendas that our leaders are already making at the continental level.
We're completely out of time, but again, I need to get a reaction, Mr. Dennis, on a statement made by Antonio Guterres in his speech. Allow me to read it. 100 million more people could be pushed into extreme poverty. We could see famines rather of historic proportions. COVID-19 has been likened to an X-ray, revealing fractures in the fragile skeleton of the societies we have built. Your reaction, sir?
COVID-19 is not something that we should take for granted. And I think people who look at it and who analyze it critically can see the impact that it's going to have on the society, on the economy, and in our political development. And therefore, it's something that our leaders must really think about very, very seriously. When you tell us to observe, to stay at home, and to ensure that we don't go to work, but what do we expect people to eat? So I think the UN Secretary General was very, very clear and very realistic in the way that we need to deal with the COVID-19. Our leaders must come up with measures, must come up with situations and solutions that can help the people. And it's a disease that is going to be there with us for some time. It's a disease that we don't know. We don't know the dimension that it's going to take. So I think when the UN Secretary General spoke, he's worried, like all of us are worried, because it is something that is really affecting the society. It is affecting our income, it is destroying our economy, and it's interfering with our social way of life. So I think there's a need for us really to interrogate ourselves strongly and to look at, come up with measures and ways that will be instrumental in making sure that the people are safe and the COVID-19 is brought under control.
In under a minute, Dr. Charles, please, let's get your closing remarks, and you could also talk about some of the opportunities for Africa's growth that have been presented by this pandemic. In under a minute, please, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. As president of Africa 55 states, we have established an organization which will have a contract with the individual Africans and not states. And I think from educating the people, we believe that they will more hold their governments to account, and they will demand answers from their government. And I think we have a sense of going forward. I think we just need unity in the world so that we can all work together and benefit from the value chain. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, sir. Your closing remarks, Mr. Dennis?
Thank you very much. I agree with you, Dr. Sinkala. We must have opportunity where we begin to ask our leaders. African Union is doing, the leaders have their own agenda. But as the African people, we must also have our own agenda. And let me tell you, the first animal that we must deal with is corruption. Corruption is destroying business in Africa. Nobody is going to invest in an environment where people are corrupted. And people cannot be rich or identified to be rich by just products of corruption. We want to be rich by identified with what business have you established. If you go to Japan, for instance, and you see companies like Subaru, you see companies like Mitsui and Company, these are big companies which are started 100, 200 years ago. And when these companies are rich, they are rich from merit. But we cannot be rich, and yet if you look at what somebody is doing or what a leader is doing, you can't even identify that richness with any activity. We must begin to look at ourselves. We must begin to say Africa must move on. We must compete with other developed nations so that we put our house in order. That is the way to go.
Indeed. Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Denis Korda, he is the president of the African Union Economic, Social and Cultural Council, and of course, Dr. Charles Sinkala, the president of Africa 55 States, an organization of African political parties, also and international relations consultant, who of course was joining us live all the way from South Africa. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us in Bottom Line Africa this afternoon. Now, still on that, chefs in South Africa cooked up a soup storm on Saturday to mark Mandela Day and feed thousands of people in need. Chefs prepared thousands of